So, since this is my first video, I figured it's important to outline why this channel exists and who I am. I want to talk about esports and sports psychology, and how those two things relate to each other. So the videos here will mostly be about how sports psychology can help esports teams or help individual players, both pro and casual. Sometimes a video will combine both, sometimes it will just be one or the other. I want this to be a place I can refine my thoughts around these topics, but also be a place that others can learn from. So, given that, I think it's also important to explain who I am and why I care so much about these two topics. For esports, that's pretty simple. I've been a fan of the LTA, formerly the LCS, and more generally, professional League of Legends for over 10 years. My love for esports goes well beyond League, but it's the primary game I've played and watched, and I've spent a lot of time being frustrated by how teams practice and play. So the esports side is pretty simple, the other side of this channel less so. For a lot of people, they may not even have heard of the term sports psychology. And even if they have, they may have a misunderstanding of what it is. Given that, I want to define it first. Sports psychology is the focus on the mental skills, tools, and processes that we engage with to perform at our peak ability. This is different than something like general therapy, because in sports psychology, we focus on high performance contexts and less on general life. However, sports psychology can pertain to so much more than just traditional sports. So instead of from here on out, I'm going to use a broader term, performance psychology. I like it more than sports psychology because the things I in this field talk about don't pertain to just sports or esports, but anywhere someone might perform. And when I say perform, I don't mean just like in a play. Surgeons perform, athletes perform, baristas perform. Anyone who's trying to do something is performing that thing. So I think it's a better term to provide a broader context for the field. So back to the actual point. Who am I in the world of performance psychology? Not really anyone right now, but I am getting a master's degree in sports and exercise psychology at one of the top schools for the field. I've also spent many years in performance contexts, primarily chess, but I also have experience both playing with and coaching amateur League of Legends teams. And when I say amateur, I really do mean amateur. We were nowhere close to pro, we're even scratching tier 3, but a lot of the experiences I had with the teams have informed how I view performance psychology. I also want to say before I jump into this fully, I do want to make it clear that I'm talking mostly from North American and European League of Legends perspectives, because those are the two scenes that I follow the most. But now that I've given a brief description on my own credentials and why I'm doing any of this, I want to get to the core of this video, which is why I think professional League of Legends scrim culture is counterproductive to improvement. I have two main reasons, a lot more than two, but I want to be concise. First, I think teams and players care way too much about win-loss record at practice. Secondly, teams fundamentally misunderstand the goals and reasons for practicing. I want to start with the win-loss column because I think it does a great job of setting up the other issues. Whenever I listen to players, coaches, fans, or really anyone talk about scrims in practice, it's always from the perspective of winning and losing the game. This is for both pro and ranked ladders. The easiest example I can show is G2. G2 originally started posting these to show which scrim opponents were canceling scrims early or not even showing up, which I'll come back to in a bit. But the important part for me is what these posts turned into. Eventually, teams stopped canceling, but G2 kept posting them, so what became the primary focus was the win-loss column, and especially against specific teams. The main example for me being the 2023 League of Legends World Championship, where they beat Energy a lot in scrims, but would eventually lose them in the Swiss bracket and get knocked out of the tournament. You can see that they were 12-2 against NRG in scrims before Worlds. Because of this, fans were confused how a team could beat another team so much in scrims and then lose on stage. To me, though, the win-loss column was completely useless as a metric for which team was stronger, because that's not how success is judged in practice. You can't win practice. I'll use traditional sports as an example here, but you would never hear a professional quarterback saying that they won practice because they threw a lot of touchdowns that day. The way you get better is just not the same way you win. Now, I understand the win-loss column for G2 is not the only thing they're tracking, and honestly, I really like a lot of the other things they're tracking on that board. I'll also add that I doubt G2 even cares that much about that win-loss record. When you listen to their players talk, it's clear to me that they have a better understanding of how to improve in this game. And I'm not even saying that they should never track the win-loss records, but I do think it becomes too much of a focus for many players and fans. When I hear players say they're improving because they're winning scrims, what I'm hearing is that those players don't understand what they're trying to achieve, and that their focus is completely on the nexus exploding. However, in practice, that's just not what matters. Here's where we'll swap more into a performance psychology talk. When we work with our performers on goals, we want them focusing on process, not outcome. For League of Legends, focusing on process would be improving a champion, setting up vision better, things like that. Outcomes would be the win-loss column, or things like total CS or KDA. Outcome goals are often things we are not directly in control of because of how performance works. They rely on how we did against someone else. Whereas process goals are things in our control, like how we reacted to a situation. Yes, how well you did on your champion in that specific game is still dependent on your opponent, but it's different than piloting it correctly or playing laning phase well. You can have a terrible game by outcome metrics because you got towered out 5 times in 10 minutes, but you still played those tower dives well. Your personal outcomes are always going to look much worse than if those tower dives never happened. Process goals are harder to define, but it's important when trying to get better to understand what they are and define them. Process versus outcome goals can be an entire series of discussions, which I'll probably want to do at some point. But this is where I think League of Legends teams and individual players struggle. They define winning and losing as the metric to know if they're getting better at the game. That's how the rank ladder works, but that's just fundamentally isn't how improving works. I'll talk more about how I think that can be improved at the end, but I think this mindset around winning and losing scrims damages how teams practice. To me, what it does is it makes teams focus on finding the best possible way to win, which sounds weird. We'd assume that's what we want, but they aren't finding the best way to win a stage game of League of Legends. They're finding the best possible way to win a scrim of League of Legends. And if there's one thing we know about players, it's how they don't treat scrims and stage games the same. So of course winning scrims is going to be different than winning on stage. And that's exactly what I think is the next major issue of practice culture in League of Legends. Players and coaches don't treat practice well with the respect or care they need to. They don't even seem to understand why we practice. I can pull any number of clips from professional League of Legends players saying how they don't take scrims seriously, or that scrims provide fake information, or that ex-players tilt super hard in scrims. But nowhere do I think the fundamental lack of understanding is so precisely shown than when Jat was discussing his time with Team Liquid. For those that don't know, Jat is currently a broadcaster for the official LCS, I guess LTA broadcast, but before that, he was a coach for Team Liquid. After his time with TL, he resumed his podcast and discussed some of his time coaching. There's one thing that stood out to me was when he was talking about doing a 5-game block of scrims against another team, and he'd said something along the lines of how the 5th game was often terrible and didn't help with practice, but you just had to run your head into that wall to get the reps. I was so confused when I heard that. Why would you spend your time doing something you consider so unhelpful when your time is already so limited as an LCS team? There's a saying that I think explains the basic reason why, which is practice makes perfect. But that isn't true. Don't get me wrong, it takes a lot of time and practice to get good at something, but what practice does is it makes what you're doing permanent. If you're practicing badly, then you are going to make permanent bad habits. Now given this, I want to look at some of those habits. First, every time I heard about a player who checks out during practice or runs it down after dying in lane because that would never happen in a stage game, or any number of ways of giving up for the scrim, it makes me want to scream. There's a lot of places to begin with why this is so problematic, but I'll start with, it's really disrespectful to your teammates and your practice partners. When I coached, I told my players that if they ever did that, I would cancel the scrim then and there, apologize to the rest of the team and our scrim partner, and we'd be done. Why? Because if you can't take the scrim seriously, then it's not going to help us improve, and I'd rather do nothing than waste the next 20 minutes of everyone's time. Everyone on your team is hopefully trying to get better, so why would you hinder that? Maybe your lane phase is over because you died early. I doubt that, but even if it was, there's still value for the rest of your team and you to get out of that scrim. One of them being that it does happen in real games, so shouldn't that be something the team gets practice at? Playing from behind when a lane isn't doing well is important. It's also helpful for you as an individual to figure out how to salvage that bad lane, because again, it happens. And here's the thing, that kind of tilting doesn't just happen after a bad play or a bad start to a game. We've seen examples when players act like this from draft. A famous example being Wonder, at the time G2's top laner, picking Yuumi top when Adam, who was K-Corp's top laner, picked Olaf. Wonder didn't think he would ever need to practice against Olaf top, so he saw his worthless practice. And all I could think about when I saw this was, why not just remake the game and as G2, ask K-Corp to not pick Olaf? Presumably, K-Corp would be willing, because they were a tier 2 team at the time, and G2 was, well, G2. They probably wanted to scrim G2 and would be willing to listen. Which brings me to my next point. Scrim culture between teams is fascinating to me. I'll move past all the issues with scrimming your opponents who you play against, because I get that for top-level League of Legends teams, they just don't have enough practice partners. Even though I think they should be practicing more against tier 2 teams, but again, a topic for another day. But if you're going to practice against other teams, why not talk to them, which it seems like they don't. Again, I've heard stories from coaches about how they want to practice late game, but their scrim opponents for the day only care about early game, and that team then checks out. Or how they really want to practice a specific pick, and the other team constantly banned it. And all I want to tell these teams is, why not tell the other team that? Presumably you asked them to scrim, so why not tell them, hey, we'd like to practice X champion into Y champion. Can we do that for game 1, and we'll let you practice what you want in game 2? It can't be about hiding picks, because if they got what they wanted, they would have to reveal a real pick. If the other team doesn't want to do this, find a better partner. Bad practice against a better team is worse than good practice against a worse team, which even then I question what worse team means for scrims, but again, not the point. I know I'm probably simplifying to some degree. I don't think teams are only tracking progress by winning or losing scrims, and I don't think every day is a complete waste of time because of the way they treat practice. But I do think these issues are systemic and give us a glimpse to a general mindset around practice and improvement. These teams don't understand what the purpose of practice is, nor do they understand how to do it well. They seemingly come into the office for the day, play 6 games of League of Legends, some of which might as well be over 5 minutes because a player checks out, win 4 of them, and then compare that to when they only won 2 of the previous day and go, we're improving. Earlier I said that I'd offer my thoughts to how I would work on this if I had the ability to. So here's where I bring back the performance psychology hat. First, I'd make sure we have a clear definition of improvement. It can't just be metrics that are measurable by the game. I can't give a direct example right now because improvement is so specific to the person and team, but it should be clear and understandable. Next, a clear direction and goal for practice. It can't be something like get better at early game. What does that look like? We need to know what we are hoping to do today. With that also comes a way to communicate with your scrum partner and coordinate how you two will talk with each other. Because at the end of the day, that's how scrimming works right now. The teams need to rely on each other. Finally, and this one is endemic in not just scrum culture, but also esports as a whole, we can't have such a short-sighted focus. Part of the reason win rate is a metric that's used and players give up after bad openings is because it's hard to view progress in its totality, especially when improvement is not linear. So you can't just look back at 3 weeks ago and usually go, we're better than we used to be. Instead, it takes a holistic view of the team and what those goals are to understand if improvement is happening. Ultimately, teams need to be okay with not always winning the game or having 0 mistakes, because if they could, they wouldn't need to be practicing. I appreciate anyone who made it to this point. Like I said at the start, this is mostly a place for me to find my ideas about esports performance psychology. The thoughts in those videos have been ones I've had for a better part of a decade. I don't know how often I'll make more videos. I'm a busy master student after all, but whenever I get the need to talk about something, I'm sure a new one will pop up here. So, thanks for watching.